After tragedy strikes his family, a small, timid lion cub is pushed out of his home and grows up in isolation, until he's finally ready to return and challenge the ruler who took everything from him. Today's recap covers Disney's The Lion King, 2019. As dawn spreads across the Pride Lands, word travels fast, the king and queen have welcomed a new heir. Animals from every corner of the savannah gather at Pride Rock to witness the moment. Rafiki steps forward, marks the newborn cub, and lifts him up for all to see, Simba, the future king. Cheers ripple through the crowd as the creatures bow in respect, all except one. Far from the celebration, Scar lounges in the shadows of his den, entertaining himself by tormenting a mouse. Zazu, the king's advisor and messenger, swoops in and announces that Mufasa expects Scar at a royal meeting. Annoyed, and with his hunt interrupted, Scar turns his irritation towards Zazu, threatening to make a meal out of him. Before he can, Mufasa appears and puts a stop to it. Mufasa isn't pleased. He points out Scar's absence from the ceremony and tells him he should have been there for the future of their kingdom. Scar masks his bitterness with sarcasm, but the real reason is obvious: he hates that the throne has moved farther away from him. Mufasa bluntly asks if Scar intends to challenge him for the crown. Scar backs down, pretending it's pointless, saying Mufasa will always rule. Mufasa corrects him: the circle will turn, and one day Simba will take his place. The next morning, Simba bounces awake, eager to spend time with his father. Mufasa takes him to a towering overlook and shows him the vast land below, explaining what it means to lead. Simba is dazzled and assumes being king means owning everything. Mufasa tells him it's the opposite: a true king isn't a taker, he's a protector. Simba spots a gloomy, shadowed stretch in the distance and asks about it. Mufasa's answer is firm: stay away from that area. Their lesson is interrupted when Zazu arrives with urgent news: hyenas have been spotted in the territory. Mufasa heads off to deal with the threat, while Simba is taken back toward home. But Simba's curiosity doesn't stay quiet for long. While wandering, he gets distracted by a crawling insect and pounces after it, scrambling over rocks until he tumbles straight into Scar's den. Scar plays the cool uncle, letting Simba ramble excitedly about the idea of becoming king. Then Scar steers the conversation exactly where he wants it, asking about the forbidden shadowy region. When Simba mentions it, Scar leans in and feeds him a tempting story: that place is the elephant graveyard, and brave lions go there to prove themselves. The suggestion hits Simba like a challenge. Determined to show he's fearless, he rushes to find Nala and convinces her to come with him. Of course, the adults don't trust them on their own. Zazu is assigned to follow and keep them safe. On the way, Simba reveals their real destination. Nala immediately decides the first mission is obvious: lose the bird. They turn their walk into a chaotic game, darting between herds and weaving through groups of animals to block Zazu's view. They sprint through clusters of flamingos and across the path of larger animals, forcing Zazu to zigzag just to keep up. At last, they slip into tall grass and vanish. Zazu flies into a dense flock and gets tangled up trying to spot them again. With the guard gone, the two cubs push forward toward the graveyard, play fighting as they go. Nala tackles Simba, pins him, and stands over him triumphantly, while Simba squirms underneath her and demands she get off. When Nala peers up the trail, her excitement fades. Those broken tusks and scattered ribs aren't just random remains. They've crossed into the elephant graveyard, way past the Pride Lands. She urges Simba to turn around, warning they're beyond the kingdom's borders. But Simba, thrilled by the forbidden discovery, brushes off her concern and keeps weaving between the massive bones. The deeper they go, the quieter it gets, until he spots a shadowy opening in the rock and heads straight for it. Inside, the air feels colder, and the light is slipping fast. Nala insists they should leave before it gets too dark, only for a pack of hyenas to close in from all sides. A sharp laugh cuts through the gloom as Shensi steps forward, eyes gleaming. She circles like she's already picked her first bite, taunting them about the king's son. Simba tries to stand tall, but they're outnumbered and boxed in. Right then, Zazu dives in, puffed up with courage and royal authority. He orders the hyenas to back off, warning that laying a tooth on either cub would mean war with Mufasa himself. Shensi isn't impressed. She surges toward them anyway, until Zazu lashes out, raking her face and buying the cubs a split second. Simba and Nala bolt. They scramble into a narrow passage beneath the rocks, hoping it leads them out. The tunnel twists, the ground uneven under their paws, their breathing loud in the darkness. But when they burst back into the open, their relief dies instantly. They've run straight into the hyenas again. Now truly trapped, the cubs brace for the worst. And then the night shakes with a roar. Mufasa launches in like a storm made of claws and fury, striking hard and fast. The hyenas scatter, suddenly a lot less brave with the king in front of them. He drives them back and delivers a clear warning: stay away from his son. Shensi, swallowing her pride, agrees, at least for now. Mufasa escorts Simba and Nala home. Once they're safely within the Pride lands, he sends Zazu to return Nala to her family, leaving him alone with Simba. The king's voice turns firm: this wasn't an adventure, it was a risk to the future of everything they'll one day be responsible for. Simba hears the disappointment, and it stings. But Mufasa doesn't let the moment stay heavy. He softens, nudges Simba into a playful scuffle, and reminds him that being brave isn't the same as being reckless. Later, when the world is quiet, father and son lie beneath the night sky. Mufasa points to the stars and explains that the great kings who came before are up there, watching, guiding, protecting those who lead after them. Elsewhere, under the cover of darkness, Scar slips into the hyenas' territory. At first, the predators tense, expecting Mufasa seeking payback. Then they realize who it is. Scar speaks with a poisonous calm, pretending the whole situation was almost generous. He claims he'd heard hunger was spreading in the shadowy lands, so he sent 2 cubs as an easy meal, yet somehow one of them returned alive. The hyenas snarl, eager to finish what they started. Scar stops them with a promise. He tells Shensi and her pack that he can offer far more than scraps: full stomachs, freedom to roam, and a future where they're no longer starving in the margins. When Shensi demands what he wants in return, Scar finally says it plainly: he wants the throne. To make that happen, Mufasa has to go. The idea sounds wild, even suicidal, but hunger makes people listen. Scar lays out his ambition like a bargain: help him remove the king, and once he rules, the hyenas will never go hungry again. After a tense beat, Shensi and the others agree, and Scar, smiling like he's already won, begins setting his takeover in motion. The following morning, Scar takes his young nephew on a training walk into a narrow gorge, claiming it's the place where lions discover their true roar. He insists this is the only way the cub can earn back his father's confidence. Trusting him, Simba begins practicing right away. Scar then excuses himself, saying he'll return later to see how things are going. Left alone, Simba watches the smaller creatures nearby and tries to sound fierce at a passing lizard, but the attempt comes out as an embarrassingly tiny squeak. Before he can try again, a deep rumble rolls through the ground. The cub freezes, looking around as dust rises in the distance, then realizes a massive herd of wildebeest is charging straight into the gorge. Simba doesn't know it, but the chaos has been triggered on purpose by the hyenas. Panicking, Simba ducks behind a boulder, praying the danger will pass. Meanwhile, back at Pride Rock, Scar rushes in with a sudden warning, telling Mufasa there's a stampede in the gorge, and that Simba is trapped inside. Without hesitation, Mufasa and Zazu bolt toward the scene. In the gorge, Simba clings desperately to a tree as the thunder of hooves grows louder. Moments later, Mufasa arrives and forces his way downward, fighting through dust and crashing bodies to reach his son. Scar stays above, calmly instructing Zazu to fetch the lionesses, ensuring he's left alone while Mufasa is in harm's way. Mufasa reaches the cub just in time, but the stampede is relentless. A wildebeest slams into the tree, snapping the branch and tossing both lions hard. Simba tumbles, stunned, convinced he's finished, until his father lunges in, scoops him up, and sets him safely on a ledge high above the rushing herd. But Mufasa doesn't get the same mercy. He's struck again and swept beneath pounding hooves. Injured and battered, he pushes himself free and begins climbing the gorge wall with everything he has left. At the top, Scar appears. Mufasa, exhausted and hanging on by his claws, pleads for help. Scar doesn't reach down. Instead, he digs his claws in, rakes his brother's face, and lets him fall back into the chaos below, where the last of the stampede finishes what the others started. When the dust finally settles, Simba creeps back down, calling for his father. He finds Mufasa motionless at the bottom of the gorge. The cub's voice breaks as he cries for help, then curls beside the body, waiting in shock for someone, anyone, to come. Scar soon arrives, wearing a mask of concern. He demands to know what Simba did, then twists the moment into a cruel accusation, telling Simba that everyone will blame him for what happened. Terrified and confused, Simba asks what he should do. Scar urges him to run, far away, and never return. As Simba turns to leave, the hyenas emerge from the shadows. Scar coldly orders them to get rid of the cub. Simba bolts, sprinting blindly until he skids at a sharp turn and tumbles over a cliff edge. From above, Shensi insists on confirmation and sends the others down to check. But the drop looks fatal. The hyenas panic, decide it's impossible anyone survived, and return with a lie, that the cub is gone. Down below, Simba lies battered beneath a tree, barely moving, waiting silently as the predators finally retreat. After the former prince scrambles down the steep ravine, he wanders with no direction, swallowed by the endless desert. Back at Pride Rock, Scar puts on a show of grief. He addresses the pride with a heavy, solemn tone, claiming he arrived too late to save his brother and his nephew. But the sadness quickly turns into strategy. He reminds everyone that the kingdom can't survive without a ruler. With that, he crowns himself the new king. Scar then plays the responsibility card, saying the job is too big for one lion alone. To keep order, he calls in reinforcements, inviting the hyenas to stand beside him as partners in power, promising safety while quietly tightening his grip over the Pride lands. Out in the desert, Simba pushes forward for days, running on nothing but exhaustion and fading hope. Eventually, the heat wins. He collapses onto the burning sand and stops moving. Hours later, a circle of vultures drifts closer, ready to claim what they believe is an easy meal, until a charging warthog barrels in and scares them off. Once the birds retreat, the warthog approaches cautiously. Perched above him is a chatty meerkat who hops down to inspect the find, only to realize the cub is still breathing. The meerkat panics and bolts to hide behind a rock, but the warthog, far more soft-hearted, points out that the kid is just a little one. He suggests they help him out, and even jokes that if they raise him, he'll grow into a powerful protector someday. When Simba finally manages to stand, the odd pair introduce themselves and ask what happened. Simba avoids the question completely, brushing past them and continuing his lonely walk. Seeing how broken he is, the meerkat switches tactics, trying to pull him out of his spiral by teaching him a new way to think. He explains a carefree philosophy, Hakuna Matata, no worries, no stress, no living in yesterday. With nothing else to cling to, Simba follows them into a completely different world, a lush, hidden paradise with greenery everywhere and a waterfall nearby, like a secret escape from the harshness of everything behind him. Once they arrive, Simba admits he's starving, but the meerkat tells him life here comes with a new menu. No more hunting zebras or antelope, those days are over. To prove it, they introduce him to their delicacy of choice. The meerkat demonstrates how the warthog can uncover a buffet of bugs and grubs, and they dig in like it's the greatest meal on earth. Simba hesitates. This clearly isn't what a lion is built for, but hunger eventually wins, and he forces himself to try it. Time passes. Simba settles into this strange new life, growing from a small cub into a young adult lion, living day by day under the Hakuna Matata mindset. Meanwhile, the Pride lands fall apart. Under Scar and the hyenas, the territory is drained and broken. Overhunting and drought drive the herds away until even the last animals begin to flee. From Pride Rock, Nala watches the ruin spreading and feels the urge to act, but her mother, Sarabi, warns her to stay out of it. Not long after, Zazu rushes in with news: the final herds are gone. But before he can say much more, hyenas appear, trying to snatch him. He barely escapes. Moments later, Scar arrives with other predators and demands to speak with Sarabi. Even though Nala clearly hates the idea, Sarabi steps forward to face him. Scar invites her to join him at the next feast, speaking like a ruler offering an honor. Sarabi doesn't play along. She confronts him, accusing him of reckless hunting and blaming his rule for the kingdom's collapse. Scar brushes it off, insisting he's simply become more efficient thanks to his forces. Then he reveals the real reason he called her. With a smug, twisted charm, Scar claims he's giving her an opportunity to be queen again. He implies the lionesses won't accept him because they still follow Sarabi, so if she stands with him, the Pride will fall in line. The threat underneath the offer is obvious. Sarabi won't give Scar what he wants. He doesn't argue for long, he punishes her instead. With a smug edge, Scar announces a new rule: the hyenas will eat first from now on, and the lionesses can take whatever scraps are left. He even mocks them, saying hyenas don't tend to leave much behind anyway. Nala can't stomach it. That night, once the Pride lands finally go quiet, she makes a choice: she'll leave and search for help beyond the borders. Using the darkness as cover, she slips between the rocky paths, careful with every step, trying not to make a sound. But Scar stirs. He lifts his head and inhales, catching her scent in the air. Instantly suspicious, he wants to know who's sneaking off. He follows the trail, closing the distance little by little, nearly close enough to spot her. Right before he can, Zazu swoops in and causes a commotion, drawing Scar's attention away at the perfect moment. Scar snaps at the bird and gives chase, and while he's distracted, Nala disappears into the night, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the kingdom. Far away, Simba continues living as if his old life never existed. With Timon and Pumbaa, he keeps up their carefree routine: no responsibilities, no past, just survival and snacks. Most days are spent hunting down bugs and stuffing themselves until they can barely move. Later, the trio stretch out under the sky, staring up at the stars. Timon casually claims they're basically giant glowing bugs, sky fireflies, in his words. When he asks Simba what he thinks, Simba hesitates, then repeats something his father once told him: that the great kings of the past still watch over the living from above. Timon and Pumbaa burst out laughing at the idea. Simba's mood darkens. He turns away, irritated and embarrassed, and wanders off alone to chew on insects in silence. While he lies there, watching the night, a small clump of fur loosens from his mane and drifts into a nearby stream. The current carries it onward. A bird snatches it up for nesting material, and the tuft continues its journey, passed along by nature in a chain of tiny, ordinary events that somehow keeps it moving across the land. Eventually, it reaches Rafiki. The old mandrill takes one look and knows exactly what it is. His expression changes, because if this fur belongs to Simba, then the impossible must be true: Mufasa's son is still alive. Pumbaa panics and bolts, but Nala is too quick. Realizing he can't outrun her, the warthog charges ahead in desperation, and accidentally leads her right to Simba. Simba jumps in front of his friend on instinct. Nala doesn't recognize him at first, and Simba doesn't recognize her either, not immediately. The two lions clash, trading blows with raw intensity. Then Simba gets knocked onto his back in a way that mirrors a moment from their childhood. Something about it clicks. Nala freezes. The truth hits her. And Simba finally sees her clearly too. It's really Nala. Overwhelmed with relief and excitement, Simba tries to sell her on his new life. He insists she'd love it here, there's food everywhere, and no one telling them what to do. But Nala's face doesn't soften for long. She tells him the Pride lands are suffering. Scar has taken over, and the hyenas are everywhere. The land has been pushed to the edge, and everyone left behind is struggling. She came to find him for one reason: they need him. Simba's smile fades. He avoids her eyes. The guilt he's buried rushes back to the surface. Instead of agreeing, he tries to deflect, showing her around, pointing out how safe everything is, insisting that this is his home now. For a moment, Nala is caught off guard by how beautiful the place is. But the wonder doesn't last. She demands to know why he never returned, why he let Scar destroy everything. She urges him to face his uncle and take responsibility. Simba refuses. He claims it's too late, and that nothing he does will fix what happened. That's when Nala's frustration boils over. She tells him he's changed, become selfish, and that coming to find him was a mistake. Hurt and furious, she walks away, needing space before she says something she can't take back. Left alone, Simba wanders off, conflicted, his thoughts spiraling as he replays the encounter, caught between the life he's built and the past he keeps pretending isn't chasing him. On his journey, Simba runs into Rafiki again, but the lion barely recognizes him. Tired and guarded, Simba treats the old mandrill like any other random creature and demands to be left in peace. Rafiki, unfazed, insists he's not there to bother him, he's there to help Simba find who he truly is. Simba assumes the monkey has lost his mind and starts to walk away, until Rafiki drops a detail that stops him cold: he once cradled Mufasa's son in his arms. Simba turns back, suddenly alert, and asks if Rafiki knew his father. Rafiki answers in a way that sounds impossible. He says he still does, because Mufasa isn't truly gone. Simba doesn't understand, but Rafiki urges him to follow, promising he'll show him the truth. Hope rising, Simba sprints after the shaman as Rafiki leads him across the land, finally stopping at the edge of a river. There, Rafiki tells Simba that what he's searching for is waiting. He gestures toward the water and asks Simba to look closely. Simba leans in, scanning the surface, and Rafiki tells him the answer isn't in the river, it's in him. As Simba stares, the sky suddenly swells with thunderclouds, wind tearing through the air as a storm gathers overhead. In the roar of it all, Mufasa's presence breaks through, his voice reminding Simba that the circle of life isn't complete without him standing where he belongs. He tells Simba to claim his role, to return, and to become the king he was meant to be. Before the storm fades, Mufasa leaves him with one final command: remember who you are, and know that he has never truly left Simba's side. Shaken but strengthened, Simba makes his choice. He bolts off with new purpose, racing to catch up to Nala. After hours of hard running through open desert, he finally finds her and says what she's been waiting to hear: they're going home. They rush toward Pride lands, but the closer they get, the worse the truth looks. When Simba reaches the gorge and sees what the kingdom has become, the weight of Mufasa's words hits him. This land was his responsibility, everything the sun once touched. In that moment, Zazu appears, overjoyed and stunned to see Simba alive. Not long after, Timon and Pumbaa show up too, refusing to let their friend face this alone. They promise they're with him no matter what. The group watches the hyenas' patterns and realizes they're out of options. Simba decides they'll need a distraction: live bait. Timon reluctantly takes the role, planning to lure the hyenas away while the others keep watch from above. Rafiki grips his old staff again, readying himself like a warrior who's been waiting for this day. Back at Pride Rock, Scar corners Sarabi once more, trying to force her into standing beside him as queen. She refuses with icy certainty, telling him he'll never measure up to Mufasa. Scar's patience snaps. He lunges at Sarabi and begins to strike, until Simba steps in at the last second, roaring for Scar to back away from his mother. The lionesses light up with relief and disbelief at Simba's return, but Scar's face hardens, anger flashing through his composure. He immediately starts shifting blame, turning on the hyenas as if they're the reason everything has gone wrong. After the reunion, Nala declares Scar's rule finished and calls the pride to stand with Simba. Scar, smooth as ever, tries to twist the moment, claiming he doesn't want bloodshed, pretending he'd hate to be responsible for harm coming to family, and slyly echoing the same kind of betrayal Simba has carried with him all these years. Nala looks at Simba like he's lost his mind, asking what he's even saying. But Scar doesn't let the moment breathe. He leans in and starts twisting the knife, pressuring Simba to admit the worst out loud. Cornered and overwhelmed, Simba finally accepts the blame for what happened to his father. And Scar? He pounces on that confession immediately, showering Simba with cruel, humiliating insults, piling guilt on top of grief until Simba can barely stand it. Step by step, Simba backs away, closer, closer, until he's right at the edge of Pride Rock. One wrong move and he slips. For a terrifying second, he nearly plunges straight down, only managing to catch himself, dangling helplessly off the cliffside. Scar stands above him, calm and smug, staring down like he's watching a replay of a memory he enjoys. He tells Simba the scene feels familiar, because it reminds him of the day Mufasa died. Scar describes looking down at Mufasa and seeing fear in his eyes, then says he sees that same fear in Simba now. And then he drops the truth. With his paws pressed against Simba, Scar leans in close and quietly confesses, he is the one who ended Mufasa's life. Simba snaps. Rage explodes out of him, he lunges upward, bites Scar across the face, and claws his way back onto the rock. Now it's Simba standing tall, staring Scar down. Scar instantly flips the story, acting like Simba is the threat, accusing him of trying to kill his own uncle. But Sarabi steps forward, voice sharp as a blade. She points out the biggest hole in Scar's story. He always claimed he arrived too late at the gorge, yet he just admitted he saw Mufasa's final look. That means he was there. Scar's mask finally cracks. Realizing he's been exposed, Scar abandons the act and gives the order, finish them all. That's when the battle erupts. Nala charges first, rallying the lionesses into a full counterattack as the hyenas swarm in. It turns into a brutal clash, claws, teeth, dust, and chaos, while the fire spreads across the rock and the sky glows with smoke and embers. Far away, Timon and Pumbaa think they've finally shaken their pursuers. They hide, trying to stay quiet, until they realize they're not alone. The hyenas creep up behind them. With no time left to panic, Timon throws himself into the fight, so boldly that it actually scares the hyenas off for a moment, buying them just enough space to survive. Back at Pride Rock, the fight rages on as the flames crawl higher. Shensi spots Nala and taunts her like she's been waiting years for this exact moment. Nala doesn't flinch, she tells her she's not a helpless cub anymore, and she's ready. They clash hard, both refusing to back down. Zazu even dives in from above, trying to distract the hyenas, but he gets grabbed and trapped, until Rafiki storms in, swinging his staff like a warrior, cracking hyenas across the head and forcing them to scatter. Even with Rafiki's help, the lionesses are still heavily outnumbered. Nala gets pushed to the brink, but she digs deep, turns the tables, and sends Shensi tumbling away. One by one, the lionesses overpower the hyenas. The hyenas finally realize the fight is slipping out of their hands, and they begin to retreat. Scar sees the tide turning too. He tries to slip away in the confusion, but Simba isn't letting him disappear. Simba cuts him off, driving him higher and higher until Scar ends up trapped with nowhere left to run. Scar drops to desperation, begging, bargaining, pretending. Then he throws the blame onto the hyenas, calling them filthy scavengers and claiming they forced his hand, even saying he planned to get rid of them anyway. The problem? The hyenas are close enough to hear every word. Simba doesn't buy Scar's lies. Scar tries one last tactic: guilt, family, mercy. And Simba, choosing to end this differently, spares him, on one condition: Scar must leave forever and never return. Exactly the same exile Scar once demanded from Simba when he was a child. Scar pretends to accept. He turns to go. Then suddenly whips around and flings burning embers straight into Simba's face. Simba roars through the pain and launches after him. The two collide in a final, vicious struggle atop the burning rock, until Scar loses his footing and falls from the edge, the same way Mufasa once did. Scar survives the drop, barely. But at the bottom, the hyenas are waiting. Scar tries to talk his way out like always, but it's too late. They heard the betrayal. They know he used them. And this time, there's no escape. They turn on Scar and tear into him. Not long after, the sky finally breaks. Rain pours down, smothering the flames and washing the kingdom clean. The smoke clears, the fighting stops, and what's left is silence, and a new beginning. Rafiki approaches Simba and, in a solemn moment, acknowledges what everyone already knows: the true king has returned. Simba takes his place, restoring balance and hope to the Pride Lands, just like Mufasa always wanted. So, what did you think of the movie? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this recap, hit like and subscribe for more. 1994's The Lion King isn't just a top-tier Disney pick for me, it's one of my all-time favorite animated movies, period. It's the full package: gorgeous hand-drawn artistry, some of Disney's most legendary songs paired with a sweeping score, and a story that's equal parts fun and emotionally crushing in the best way. The voice cast is a huge reason it endures too. James Earl Jones and Jeremy Irons in particular are iconic, and that opening is still one of Disney's strongest ever, right up there with The Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's also why Disney's live-action remake era has been such a mixed bag. A lot of people call these films unnecessary, even cynical, and honestly I get it. A few have justified their existence with real craft. Cinderella and The Jungle Book are easily the standouts, but plenty of others have landed somewhere between fine and why does this exist? Going into The Lion King, 2019, I wasn't exactly buzzing. I didn't love the marketing, and I definitely questioned the point of remaking something already so beloved. Still, I watched it anyway, partly because I'm a longtime Disney fan, and partly because my sister was determined to see it. Rewatching it now, and finally getting around to writing about it, I'll say this: it's not the disaster some people make it out to be. It also didn't win me over the way I hoped. My reaction stayed pretty middle of the road, while my sister came out much happier than I did. And yes, I tried to judge it on its own. But that's the thing with remakes: when the original is as strong as 1994's Lion King, comparison isn't just tempting, it's almost unavoidable. The gap in impact between the two versions is hard to ignore. That said, the 2019 film absolutely has strengths. The most obvious one, by far, is the visual presentation. It's a major technical flex. The landscapes can be stunning, and certain sequences are genuinely breathtaking, especially the opening. At times it plays like a high-end wildlife documentary, with the animals rendered in an impressively realistic style. Even if that realism comes with a trade-off, the faces and eyes sometimes don't communicate enough emotion. The music also still carries weight. The score hits hardest during the stampede, and that moment remains one of Disney's most effective tearjerkers. The songs are mostly still impactful too, with a couple of exceptions. The opening number is the closest the movie came to really getting me in the chest. It's grand, reverent, and visually designed to overwhelm you. In smaller moments, the script still finds space for humor and tension. Timon and Pumbaa bring a lot of the comedy that actually lands, and the hyenas add some menace. The story beats that are strong in any version still work: the opening, the friendship and comedy stretch with Timon and Pumbaa, and the stampede sequence, even if it didn't quite give me the same chills, partly because everyone already knows exactly where it's heading. I also liked a couple of the update choices. Leaning into a scarier vibe for the hyenas and giving the lionesses a bit more to do was a smart move. Beyoncé didn't quite click for me either. Her voice felt mismatched to the character design, and the performance came across oddly detached. The biggest letdown, however, was Chiwetel Ejiofor. He's a fantastic actor, but this version of Scar felt too muted for my taste, less theatrical, less wickedly enjoyable, and far less memorable than the animated film's take. When you're following a performance as deliciously sharp as Iron's, simply being serious isn't enough. You need a presence that bites. Overall, I don't think The Lion King, 2019, is worthless, and I definitely don't think it's the worst of Disney's remakes. Visually, it's often astounding, and parts of it are undeniably entertaining. But as a whole, it didn't capture the same magic for me: more impressive than moving, more polished than powerful. For some viewers, that might be enough. For me, it left a lot of warmth on the table. This remake is essentially the 1994 animated classic rebuilt with hyperreal CGI. And that's both its selling point and its biggest limitation. The story is still the same Shakespeare-tinged jungle drama, with shades of Hamlet, and even echoes of biblical brothers in conflict narratives, but the new version rarely feels like it has a reason to exist beyond showing what modern visual effects can do. Let's start with the music, because that's where the film swings wildly between Pretty Solid and What Happened Here. Circle of Life lands the best and genuinely carries some weight. I Just Can't Wait to Be King and Hakuna Matata also hold up fairly well, even if they don't feel as lively as they used to. But then there's Be Prepared, which comes across strangely exaggerated and awkward, like the movie didn't know whether to commit to theatrical villainy or realism. It's a frustrating choice, because that song is one of Disney's greatest villain numbers and the film doesn't do it justice. Can You Feel the Love Tonight feels like competent karaoke, not unwatchable, but not exactly moving either. And Spirit sticks out the most. It doesn't blend into the film's tone and feels more like a showcase moment than a natural piece of storytelling. It's not that the vocals are bad, it's that the song feels imported from a different project. On the character side, the update does make a few noticeable tweaks. Simba is still not my favorite, but I'll admit he's slightly easier to take this time. Instead of reading as purely bratty, he comes off more like a naive kid who doesn't really understand what he's doing yet. Scar, meanwhile, is less of a cartoon villain and more of a grounded threat, which is arguably the most meaningful adjustment the remake makes. In that sense, the film's Heart of Change is Scar's shift in tone, more menacing, less theatrical. There are also a handful of additions that sound good on paper. The lionesses have a bit more personality, and there's extra dialogue sprinkled in. The problem is that these expansions don't consistently improve the experience. Some of the new lines and inserted moments actually interrupt the rhythm of scenes you already know by heart, and a few changes feel unnecessary, like the film is editing simply to prove it's different, even when the original version already worked. And that leads to the central issue: it's too faithful. Scene after scene plays like a near-photographic recreation, with only occasional flashes of warmth. For long stretches, the movie feels emotionally muted, almost like a technical demo acting out a story instead of a story being lived. Even the most devastating moment, which used to hit like a punch to the chest, is handled more quickly and with less impact than before. It's still the same event, but the film doesn't linger in the way that makes it ache. The realism is impressive, no question. The environments are stunning, and the animals look believable in a nature documentary sense. But that realism creates a weird clash. These look like real animals, yet they're delivering a very human drama with human timing, human reactions, and human performance beats. Animation easily solves that problem because the fake style gives you permission to accept expressive faces and heightened emotion. Here, the film asks you to read subtle feelings on faces that don't naturally carry them the same way, and the result is often flat. Sometimes it's even a little unsettling. Scar's expressions in particular can land in an odd, almost eerie zone, as if the face doesn't quite match the intention behind the voice. That's the contradiction that kept distracting me. The visuals insist on reality, but the story requires stylization. It's like trying to fit a stage play into a wildlife documentary format. The rendering might be accurate, but accuracy isn't the same thing as soul. Now, is it a perfect remake? Not even close. It doesn't add much to the culture, and it often feels like an exercise in effects rather than a reinterpretation with a clear purpose. At times it plays like a sketch of a story, all the correct beats are there, all the pieces are assembled, but the spirit doesn't always show up. You can't shake the sense that the movie's greatest achievement is reminding you how effective the animated version still is. But it's not worthless either. It's watchable, and in moments it's genuinely enjoyable. There are pieces that work, and some viewers will absolutely connect with it. Even with the absence of several beloved Broadway additions like They Live in You, Shadowland, and Endless Night, it can still feel like a satisfactory update for people who want a familiar story in a new visual package. And one major plus, the moment Mufasa speaks, that voice is unmistakable. James Earl Jones brings an immediate gravitas that still feels iconic, even if you can hear a hint of time passing since the original. That presence counts for something. In the end, this film is impressive as technology, sometimes even exciting as spectacle, but uncertain as storytelling. It's not a disaster, and it has its highlights. But for all its polish and realism, it rarely justifies itself beyond being a very expensive reminder that the animated classic already did this with more heart. J.D. McCrary, voicing Simba as a cub, and Donald Glover, taking over for Simba's adult years, both do strong work portraying a young heir weighed down by grief and a crushing misconception that he somehow caused his father's sudden death. On the other side, Chiwetel Ejiofor plays Scar with a quieter, more restrained menace, less cartoonishly evil, more cold and calculating, which makes his takeover feel unsettling in a different way. A big question hanging over this remake is how you recreate what made the stage production so special, especially that emotionally overwhelming circle of life opening that can still hit like a punch to the heart. One advantage the film has over the Broadway version, though, is scale. The stage show can only suggest the animal kingdom with selective appearances, while this version can flood the screen with wildlife throughout, making the world feel packed with life in a way theater simply can't always manage. That opening sequence, in particular, leans into spectacle. The land's creatures gather in ritual-like unity to witness Mufasa presenting his newborn son. Rafiki, the dignified shaman figure, recognizes royalty in an almost mystical way, sensing it through touch and instinct, before carrying the cub to the edge of Pride Rock for that iconic introduction. The story also spends time on Simba's bond with Nala, and it's clear how their early choices ripple forward. Their youthful missteps don't just fade away, they circle back and set the stage for Simba to make an even bigger error, one that Scar is all too ready to exploit. That said, Beyoncé's Nala feels oddly sidelined. For a performer with that much presence, she's given surprisingly little to do, and her singing moments are brief enough to feel like missed potential. Musically, I've never fully understood why some songs are treated as essential. The Morning Report doesn't add much for me, and Hakuna Matata has always landed as more catchy than meaningful. I've jokingly called it potato/potato energy for years. And while Can You Feel the Love Tonight should be pure romance, the way Pumbaa and Timon are inserted into it comes off as childish and distracting. It's the same cringe I sometimes feel in the stage version too, but in this realistic CGI style, their interruptions felt even more intrusive against what should be one of Disney's most beautiful love songs. Still, there's no denying the movie is often stunning to look at. The visuals are frequently impressive, and several sequences are shot with real tension that hold your attention even when the story beats are familiar. That's why the extreme split in reactions is so odd, so many harsh reviews versus equally passionate praise. Personally, I think it could have benefited from a bit more care and breathing room. Another 10 to 15 minutes, especially if it had allowed more of the cut material to return, might have helped the pacing and emotional build. As it stands, it's a decent movie musical, far from perfect, but not a disaster either. In fact, this is one of the rare live-action-era Disney remakes I'd rank above the original, though I should admit I don't have much nostalgia for the older classics. Even as a kid, I often found those films too cutesy and not particularly funny. The 1990s animation, for me, was a slog. This version at least feels like a move in a better direction. The CGI largely outclasses the older cartoon look, and while not every visual choice works, it's hard to dismiss the technical achievement. The voice cast is serviceable rather than standout, James Earl Jones aside, and the musical numbers don't always land with the same iconic punch as the original. But taken as straightforward entertainment, it's watchable. Disney's recent habit of remaking its animated library has produced mixed critical results, even when audiences show up in huge numbers. And it's worth noting, despite being marketed alongside live-action remakes, this isn't truly live-action at all, it's a photoreal CGI reinterpretation of the 1994 film. Like the earlier version, it borrows its skeleton from Hamlet, a prince, a murdered father, an uncle hungry for power, and a hero misled into blaming himself because he doesn't know the real betrayal behind the tragedy. I expected Jon Favreau to reshuffle more than he does. Instead, it's remarkably close to the 1994 story, sometimes so close that the longer runtime starts to feel heavy. As the film went on, I found my energy dipping, and I realized part of the problem. The movie often knows it's replaying familiar beats without enough freshness or urgency to justify the repetition. All of that said, this did leave me wanting to revisit the original 90s film. I remember liking it more than I did on my last watch, so maybe it's time I go back and see how it holds up now. Having said that, this one is going to land very differently depending on who's watching. If you've never seen the earlier version, there's a good chance you'll be impressed and totally swept up in it. If you grew up loving the original and hold it close, this might feel a bit disrespectful, or at least strangely hollow. Like with most remakes, the real verdict probably sits somewhere in between. The biggest strength here is obvious, the visuals. Whether you call it animation, photoreal CGI, or live-action style filmmaking, the animal world looks incredible. Nearly every shot is polished, detailed, and surprisingly convincing. Even if you don't connect with everything else, it's hard to deny how stunning the film looks. And since the core story is already proven to work, the filmmakers had a strong foundation. But this is also where things get tricky. Some choices feel like unnecessary tinkering, small shifts, additions, or rearranged moments that don't always improve anything. A few musical and staging decisions can feel odd too, like placing a moment that feels built for nighttime energy into a brighter setting, which changes the mood. Some viewers will call that picky. Others will feel it throws off the atmosphere. The best approach is probably to judge it on its own terms. If you go in expecting it to recreate the exact emotional impact of the original, disappointment is likely. If you accept it as a glossy reinterpretation rather than a replacement, you might enjoy it a lot more. Quick story recap, spoiler light, but still the main beats. In the African savannah, a young lion named Simba is adored by his parents, King Mufasa and Queen Sarabi, and is raised with the expectation that he'll one day lead the Pride Lands. Mufasa tries to teach him what leadership means, but Simba is young, curious, and easy to manipulate. That weakness is exactly what his jealous uncle Scar counts on. Scar, determined to claim the throne, tricks Simba and his friend Nala into wandering into a dangerous area where hyenas corner them, until Mufasa arrives in time to save them. Scar then escalates his plan, setting up a disaster meant to remove both Mufasa and Simba at once. Simba survives, but he's left believing the tragedy is his fault. He runs away, and Scar takes over with the hyenas at his side. Far from home, Simba grows up in a distant place, trying to bury the past. Eventually, Nala finds him and reveals the Pride Lands have turned bleak and lifeless under Scar's rule. With everything at stake, Simba has to decide whether to keep hiding, or return and face what he's been running from. My take on the 2019 remake: this film is essentially a glossy redo of the 1994 classic, and in that sense it can feel unnecessary. It's directed by Jon Favreau and runs just under 2 hours, and it clearly wants to show off how far visual effects have come. On that technical level, it absolutely succeeds. Emotionally, though, it's a mixed bag. The imagery is gorgeous, but the storytelling sometimes feels like it's going through the motions, almost like the film is checking off scenes rather than letting them breathe. Some of the musical moments also didn't hit for me, a few songs feel flatter than they should, and overall the soundtrack didn't spark the same magic. That said, I did have a genuinely good time while watching it. Even though I already knew where the plot was going, it didn't ruin the experience. I found myself locked in during the heavier scenes and grinning during the lighter ones. The humor helps a lot, especially whenever Timon and Pumbaa take over. Their Hakuna Matata stretch adds much-needed warmth, and little comedic bits, including a quick nod to "The Lion Sleeps Tonight," kept things lively. There's also a funny edge to Pumbaa's moments later on that adds levity when the film gets intense. Scar's scenes, on the other hand, keep the tone dark for long stretches, and while the big tragic turning point still works, what surprisingly got me most were the quieter, looking up at the sky moments, those scenes where the night feels symbolic and the film slows down. The father and son talk about the kings of the past watching from above is especially effective, and later that same kind of stargazing quiet returns in a way that lands nicely. I also liked the reunion between Simba and Nala. The playful sparring and warmth in that scene brought some charm back into the story. So overall, beautiful to look at, sometimes awkward in execution, and not as soulful as the classic. It's not a disaster, but it also doesn't fully justify its existence beyond the spectacle. This 2019 live-action, or more accurately, hyper-realistic CGI, take on Disney's The Lion King is, in many ways, completely unnecessary. At its core, it feels like a crowd-pleasing nostalgia project, another attempt by Disney to capitalize on the legacy of its animation golden era. And honestly, the visuals are incredible. The CGI is jaw-dropping and often stunning to look at. But that's also the problem. If I had to sum up the film in one sentence, it would basically be a gorgeous technical showcase. Because story-wise, we already know exactly what happens. The 1994 animated version is still widely loved and didn't exactly need a remake, certainly not one that mainly exists to prove how real animals can look on screen. I really wanted to enjoy it, I did. But it's tough to fully sink into this version when you've seen the original and connected with it emotionally. Disney has been on this streak of remaking classic animated movies into live action, and at times this one felt like part of that assembly line rather than a story that truly demanded a new form. In a weird way, that can almost feel like a disrespectful move, not because the movie is incompetent, but because it's redoing something that already worked beautifully. That said, I have to give credit where it's due. The film handles some of its deeper ideas surprisingly well. Moments like Mufasa explaining that a king doesn't own everything, but instead carries the responsibility of maintaining balance, the whole circle of life concept, never came across as cheesy or forced. Those scenes landed naturally, which isn't easy to pull off in a remake that many people already approach with skepticism. So in that sense, they did a genuinely convincing job with a tricky challenge. Casting-wise, it was also interesting. Bringing back an iconic voice like James Earl Jones was a nice touch, and the new lineup includes several major names: Donald Glover, Beyoncé, Keegan-Michael Key, John Connie, Florence Kasumba, and even Seth Rogen. I can't judge the English performances too much because I watched the German dub, which was solid overall. Early on I struggled a little with young Simba's voice, but after a while I adjusted. The German versions of Elton John's songs were handled better than I expected too. This could have easily gone wrong, but it didn't. The music in general was one of the biggest strengths of the movie. And visually? From start to finish it's undeniably beautiful. Every scene looks polished and carefully crafted, and that alone adds a lot of charm. I've seen people complain that the look feels too modern for the story, but I don't really buy that criticism. If anything, the realism is the whole point of this remake's existence, so blaming it for looking advanced feels like missing what they were trying to do. I also noticed that critics weren't especially kind to the film, and I can't say I'm shocked. It's one of those movies where fans often have a better time than reviewers do. Personally, I say ignore the noise. Don't let the reviews decide your experience for you. When the film hits its stride, it's genuinely exciting, and it kept me engaged far more than I expected. If you can, watch it on a big screen. This is the kind of movie that's built for a theater. Compared to other recent Disney remakes, this one stands near the top for me. I watched Aladdin earlier that year and thought it was decent, but not amazing. This one, though, becomes more absorbing as it goes along. It's surprisingly enchanting despite my reservations, and you can absolutely see where the budget went. It's on the screen in every frame. I don't know how long it'll stay in my top spot, but at that moment it was easily one of my favorite releases of 2019. I'd recommend it, especially because it gives younger audiences a chance to have their own Lion King in theaters experience. And if they don't end up loving this version, it might even lead them back to the 90s original, which is still absolutely worth watching. Most importantly, the runtime never dragged for me. It didn't feel like 2 hours. It moved quickly, and honestly, I could have sat there longer without losing interest. For all its flaws and all the "do we need this?" questions, it's still a memorable ride. So my advice is simple: don't get distracted by the online discourse. Go see it and judge it for yourself. If you're even slightly curious, it's worth the experience, especially in theaters that I have to admit, some of this is still kind of baffling to me, but I get it. Big budgets keep the lights on, pay the bills, and keep the Disney machine spinning. And to be fair, one thing this remake absolutely nails is the voice cast. It's stacked with talent, and you can hear the professionalism in nearly every performance. Still, I can't shake the question: why tinker with something that already worked so well back in 1994? I understand the appeal for new viewers, especially anyone who didn't grow up with the animated version. On a visual level, it is undeniably impressive: lush landscapes, detailed animals, and some genuinely stunning shots. But for me, shiny CGI only carries a film so far. At a certain point, the technology stops feeling like an upgrade and starts feeling like the entire pitch. The story kicks off like a classic tragedy: brothers at war over power, a young heir positioned as a threat, and betrayal lurking around every corner. The villain, Scar, ultimately takes control, propped up by his band of Hyena enforcers, and their rule slowly drains the life from the land with policies that might as well be designed to ruin everything. Where the film does outdo the original is in the sense of danger. The action sequences feel bigger, sharper, and more intense, and the peril is portrayed with a realism that raises the stakes. That might be exactly what some viewers want. For me, though, it sometimes felt like too much weight for a family film, especially toward the end, where the tension really ramps up. Technically speaking, it's a remarkable achievement. The animals move and behave in such a lifelike way that you can almost forget you're watching animation. That realism is a selling point, but it's also the movie's strangest hurdle. There's something inherently odd about ultra-realistic animals delivering heartfelt monologues and breaking into song. The animated film could get away with it because the stylization made everything feel natural. Here, the closer it looks to reality, the more distracting those same moments become. So by the time it wrapped up, I kept circling back to the same conclusion: this wasn't made because the original needed fixing. Nobody was complaining about the classic's limitations. Nobody was demanding a near-identical redo. This exists because familiar stories are reliable revenue, and this one was always going to sell. The 1994 animated film remains a beloved crowd-pleaser, a massive hit that even spawned a hugely successful stage musical. And like several other Disney classics that later got live-action makeovers, this one eventually received the same treatment about 25 years later, live-action, at least in the marketing sense. It's directed by Jon Favreau, who has experience blending spectacle with family-friendly storytelling. The setting is the Pride Lands of Africa, centered around Pride Rock where the lions rule the animal kingdom. The story opens with the kingdom gathering for the ceremonial presentation of a newborn prince, Simba, welcomed in a grand celebration of life and continuity. And from there, you're basically watching a highly polished, near scene-for-scene redo, impressive to look at, faithful to the original, but often missing the spark that made the first version feel timeless. If you want a stunning technical showcase and you're new to the story, you'll probably have a great time. If you grew up with the original, though, you may find yourself wondering, like I did, whether visual realism is worth what gets lost along the way. That I have to admit, some of this is still kind of baffling to me, but I get it. Big budgets keep the lights on, pay the bills, and keep the Disney machine spinning. And to be fair, one thing this remake absolutely nails is the voice cast. It's stacked with talent, and you can hear the professionalism in nearly every performance. Still, I can't shake the question, why tinker with something that already worked so well back in 1994? I understand the appeal for new viewers, especially anyone who didn't grow up with the animated version. On a visual level, it is undeniably impressive, lush landscapes, detailed animals, and some genuinely stunning shots. But for me, shiny CGI only carries a film so far. At a certain point, the technology stops feeling like an upgrade and starts feeling like the entire pitch. The story kicks off like a classic tragedy, brothers at war over power, a young heir positioned as a threat, and betrayal lurking around every corner. The villain, Scar, ultimately takes control, propped up by his band of Hyena enforcers, and their rule slowly drains the life from the land with policies that might as well be designed to ruin everything. Our hero, presumed gone, returns in dramatic fashion to reclaim the throne and restore balance, like a pulp sci-fi savior showing up at the last minute to boot out the tyrant and set the world right again. But honestly, a lot of the movie felt weirdly flat for long stretches. It plods along until the comic duo arrives, and that's when it finally starts to feel entertaining, especially for adults. That midsection lifts the energy, gives the film some personality, and offers a break from the seriousness. Even so, if I'm choosing a modern jungle-themed reimagining, I'd personally take Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle over this. What originally pulled me in here was the marketing and the star power. Like a lot of families, the animated Lion King is a regular rewatch in my home, so I'm not coming at this as someone who dislikes the original. If anything, that's the problem. This remake sticks so closely to the earlier film that it practically begs you to compare them scene by scene. And that comparison is not kind to the remake. Yes, the visuals are upgraded. But the direction, timing, and emotional punch often feel weaker. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why, because on paper the ingredients are similar, same story beats, familiar dialogue, recognizable songs, iconic moments. Yet the end result doesn't land the same way. The performances are a mixed bag. The cast is undeniably impressive, but some characters feel less memorable than their earlier counterparts. Scar is the clearest example for me. The actor is excellent in general, but this version doesn't match the bite, theatrical flair, or musical presence that made the original so effective. That slightly diminished impact carries across several roles, good performances, just not as magnetic. Where the film does outdo the original is in the sense of danger. The action sequences feel bigger, sharper, and more intense, and the peril is portrayed with a realism that raises the stakes. That might be exactly what some viewers want. For me, though, it sometimes felt like too much weight for a family film, especially toward the end, where the tension really ramps up. Technically speaking, it's a remarkable achievement. The animals move and behave in such a lifelike way that you can almost forget you're watching animation. That realism is a selling point, but it's also the movie's strangest hurdle. There's something inherently odd about ultra-realistic animals delivering heartfelt monologues and breaking into song. The animated film could get away with it because the stylization made everything feel natural. Here, the closer it looks to reality, the more distracting those same moments become. So by the time it wrapped up, I kept circling back to the same conclusion: this wasn't made because the original needed fixing. Nobody was complaining about the classic's limitations. Nobody was demanding a near-identical redo. This exists because familiar stories are reliable revenue, and this one was always going to sell. The 1994 animated film remains a beloved crowd-pleaser, a massive hit that even spawned a hugely successful stage musical. And like several other Disney classics that later got live-action makeovers, this one eventually received the same treatment about 25 years later, live-action, at least in the marketing sense. It's directed by Jon Favreau, who has experience blending spectacle with family-friendly storytelling. The setting is the Pride Lands of Africa, centered around Pride Rock where the lions rule the animal kingdom. The story opens with the kingdom gathering for the ceremonial presentation of a newborn prince, Simba, welcomed in a grand celebration of life and continuity. And from there, you're basically watching a highly polished, near scene-for-scene redo, impressive to look at, faithful to the original, but often missing the spark that made the first version feel timeless. If you want a stunning technical showcase and you're new to the story, you'll probably have a great time. If you grew up with the original, though, you may find yourself wondering, like I did, whether visual realism is worth what gets lost along the way. If you're in the mood for a classic rise, fall, and return story with big emotions and even bigger landscapes, this movie delivers exactly that, set across the sweeping Pride Lands, where every creature has a place in the grand balance of nature. The film opens with Mufasa guiding young Simba through his future home, teaching him what it means to lead. It's not just about strength, it's about responsibility, respect, and the idea that all life is connected in one continuous cycle. Simba is excited, curious, and honestly a little impatient, because in his mind, being king sounds like the best job in the world. But while Simba is dreaming, trouble is already brewing. Mufasa's brother, Scar, is quietly nursing jealousy and ambition. He's tired of living in someone else's shadow, and he's ready to rewrite the royal order. Scar's plan isn't a quick grab for power, it's calculated. He builds alliances in the darkest corners of the kingdom, teaming up with a pack of hyenas led by Shensi, along with Kamari and Azizi. Their deal is simple: help him take the throne, and they'll get free access to hunt in the Pride Lands. Meanwhile, Simba's life is moving forward too, especially with Nala, his closest friend and future partner. But Simba, being Simba, can't resist proving himself. Scar uses that overconfidence as a weapon, manipulating Simba into visiting a dangerous elephant graveyard, dragging Nala along with him. The decision nearly costs them everything when the hyenas attack, until Mufasa arrives in time to rescue them. Afterward, Mufasa doesn't just scold Simba. He forgives him, and in a quiet, heartfelt moment, tells him that the great kings of the past live on, watching from above, guiding the ones who come next. It's one of those scenes that hits harder than you expect, because it's both a lesson and a promise. Scar, though, is done waiting. He sets his true trap in a gorge, tricking Simba into thinking it's just a place to practice his roar. What Simba doesn't know is that the hyenas are already driving a wildebeest stampede straight toward him. Scar then alerts Mufasa, acting like a concerned uncle, so Mufasa rushes in to save his son. And Mufasa does save Simba. But the escape comes at a terrible cost. In the chaos, Mufasa ends up clinging to the edge of the gorge, hanging on for his life. Scar steps in close, and instead of helping, he makes sure Mufasa doesn't get back up. The fall that follows changes everything. Simba finds his father's body, shattered by grief and confusion. Scar twists the knife even further, convincing Simba that it's somehow his fault, that his actions caused this tragedy. Then Scar orders the hyenas to finish the job. They believe Simba is gone after a cliffside chase, but Simba survives and disappears into the wilderness. Back at Pride Rock, Scar announces that both Mufasa and Simba are dead, and he crowns himself king. The hyenas move in, and with them comes decay, because Scar's rule isn't leadership, it's exploitation. Out in the desert, Simba collapses from exhaustion, only to be saved by two unlikely allies, Timon, a fast-talking meerkat, and Pumbaa, a warm-hearted warthog. They take Simba far from his past and introduce him to a new way of living: no guilt, no pressure, no worries. Their motto becomes Simba's escape hatch, and as time passes, Simba grows into adulthood in a lush jungle life that feels like a world away from the Pride lands. But the past doesn't stay buried forever. Back home, the land has become a shadow of what it once was. Scar's reign turns Pride Rock into a bleak, struggling kingdom, and the lionesses are barely holding things together. Nala, now grown, sneaks away to find help, risking her life to do it. When she finally crosses paths with Simba again, the reunion is emotional and intense. There's love, nostalgia, and also tension, because Nala is focused on saving their home, and Simba is trying to avoid the pain he thinks he caused. Nala urges him to return, but Simba refuses, still trapped in shame. That's when the movie pivots into its spiritual heartbeat. Simba meets Rafiki, who reminds him that running from the past doesn't erase it, and that Mufasa's strength lives on through Simba. Soon after, Simba has a powerful moment under the night sky where Mufasa's presence feels close again, like a final push toward who Simba is meant to be. And this time, Simba chooses courage over comfort. He returns to Pride Rock with Timon and Pumbaa at his side, slipping past the hyenas and confronting Scar. Scar tries to control the story the way he always has, mocking Simba and pressing his guilt. But in a critical moment, Scar lets the truth slip: he admits he killed Mufasa. That confession flips the entire battle. Simba exposes Scar in front of the Pride, and Scar's lies finally collapse. A full fight breaks out, lionesses versus hyenas, while Simba and Scar face off directly. Simba wins, but what's important is the choice he makes: he spares Scar and orders him to leave, refusing to become the kind of ruler Scar was. Scar doesn't accept mercy. He attacks anyway. The final struggle ends with Scar falling from the heights of Pride Rock. He survives the drop, but the hyenas, having overheard Scar trying to betray them, turn on him and finish what his ambition started. With Scar gone, rain finally returns, washing the Pride lands clean. Simba takes his rightful place as king, Nala becomes his queen, and the kingdom begins to heal. And in the closing moments, the cycle continues. Rafiki presents Simba and Nala's newborn cub to the gathered animals, echoing the film's opening message: life goes on, and leadership passes forward. The supporting cast also adds extra flavor throughout, including Serafina, a guinea fowl character, a bush baby, and an impala, each adding small moments of personality and humor around the main storyline. Final thoughts: this film works because it mixes adventure, emotion, comedy, and mythic storytelling into one clean arc. It's not just about claiming a throne, it's about earning the right to stand where you belong. First, the presentation is jaw-dropping. The film leans into a hyperreal, nature documentary look where the animals and landscapes feel almost tangible. For long stretches, you genuinely forget you're watching animation, right up until the characters start talking. That's the trade-off. The realism is incredible, but it can also limit how much emotion comes through on the animals' faces compared to the expressive 1994 version. On the story side, this is essentially the same Lion King fable you already know: royal family drama, betrayal, exile, and a return to reclaim what was lost. It still carries those mythic and theatrical echoes. People often connect it to Hamlet, and in many scenes it sticks extremely close to the original, sometimes feeling like a longer, ultra-polished replay rather than a bold reinterpretation. The voice cast does solid work overall. The villain performance stands out as a highlight, bringing a sharp edge to the character. The returning father figure is a welcome presence for longtime fans, though the material he's given doesn't feel meaningfully refreshed. much of it plays like a direct repeat. Meanwhile, some of the newer choices work better than expected, and some will come down to personal preference depending on how attached you are to the original voices. Musically, you still get the core appeal of the classic songs, but the overall soundtrack experience may feel uneven. A newer addition, including Beyoncé's Spirit, which earned major awards attention, brings a modern pop flavor, but it doesn't completely change the musical identity of the film. If you love the original setlist, you might notice certain favorites aren't emphasized the way you remember, and the mix of old and new won't land equally for everyone. One thing this version does excel at is showing how far filmmaking tech has come. If you ever get the chance to watch the behind-the-scenes featurettes, they're arguably the most fascinating part of the package, highlighting how digital environments and virtual production tools help the team stage scenes as if they were exploring a real location together. So where does that leave it? As a spectacle, it's absolutely worth seeing. As a reimagining, it can feel a bit cautious, more committed to realism and technical achievement than to creating new emotional highs. In the end, it's an impressive animated musical drama that looks stunning, sounds great on a strong home setup, and delivers a solid experience, even if it sometimes feels like it's choosing visual perfection over deeper impact. Going into Disney's live-action The Lion King, my expectations were honestly sky-high. The 1994 animated film is iconic, and after a run of other Disney live-action remakes, it felt like this one had to land. And in some ways, it does, mostly on a technical level. But as a full experience, it left me more impressed than moved. Let's start with the best part: the visuals are absolutely stunning. The effects are so polished and so lifelike that you'll catch yourself wondering what's real and what's rendered. The landscapes, lighting, fur detail, and the way the animals move, technically, it's a powerhouse. If I were rating this purely on CGI craftsmanship, it would be hard not to hand it a near-perfect score. It's that impressive. And that's also where the main problem begins. Because the more photorealistic the animals become, the more the movie relies on subtle expression, tiny facial shifts, emotion in the eyes, body language that communicates fear, joy, guilt, or heartbreak. In animation, artists exaggerate and stylize those emotions so they read instantly. In this version, the characters often look like beautifully filmed wildlife that happen to be speaking. A lot of scenes that should hit hard don't hit the way they're supposed to. You end up with dialogue laid over gorgeous animal shots, but without the emotional push that makes the story feel alive. At times it's like watching a very high-budget nature documentary that someone added a script to, except if I wanted that, I'd rather watch David Attenborough and actually learn something along the way. The original film worked because it wasn't just animals talking. It was performance. The 1994 version was shaped by artists who studied real animal movement, sure, but then translated that movement into expressive acting. The animation wasn't realistic for realism's sake, it was designed to communicate feeling. I remember seeing the original in theaters, and even then, it felt like the creators understood exactly how to turn a lion's posture or a character's eyes into storytelling. This remake nails realism, but sometimes loses the soul in the process. And it's not only the emotional weight that suffers, some characters take a real hit. The hyenas are a great example. In the original, they were a scene-stealing part of the movie, funny, chaotic, weirdly charming, and memorable. Here, they feel less like characters and more like background pieces. The energy is toned down, the impact is reduced, and they come off like an afterthought rather than a major ingredient in the villain's side of the story. That's a big loss, because those moments used to break tension and add personality. To be fair, the movie does still have bright spots, and for me the biggest ones are Simba's two companions. They're the main source of humor and momentum, and whenever they show up, the film suddenly feels lighter and more entertaining. They bring comic relief, and even when the songs or lyrics are slightly tweaked, that section of the movie is easily the most fun. Still, the pacing can feel slow. The look of the film is so grounded and so same-toned that long stretches start blending together. There's a constant dry, earthy palette, accurate to the setting, yes, but it can become visually monotonous over time. At points it's like watching National Geographic, only with fewer surprises. What's strange is that Disney clearly has the technical side of filmmaking completely under control. The production quality is enormous. But for a while now, they've struggled with the part that makes you actually care: storytelling, character work, and emotional connection. They've acquired or leaned heavily on massive brands, Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, and not everything has felt as strong as it should. And now, even their own classics are being remade in a way that sometimes feels more like a showcase of technology than a fully reimagined story with purpose. This remake also faces a unique challenge: The Lion King isn't just a children's story. Under the surface, it's essentially a tragic, Shakespeare-like arc: betrayal, guilt, exile, identity, responsibility, and return. Pulling that off with photorealistic CGI animals is a tall order. It's not simply, turn an animated classic into live action. It's asking computer-generated lions to convincingly carry dramatic scenes that rely on performance and expressiveness. That's why comparisons to Favreau's The Jungle Book are unavoidable. In that film, you had a human lead to anchor emotion, plus stylized character choices that supported humor and personality in a way that still fit the world. With The Lion King, that safety net isn't there. Everything depends on animals communicating human-level drama while still looking like real wildlife, and that balancing act doesn't always hold. Now, I will say this: nostalgia will affect your experience a lot. If you're someone who grew up loving the original and remember every beat and expression, you might notice the emotional differences more sharply and feel disappointed. On the other hand, if the original is a distant memory, or you're approaching this with fresh eyes, you may find it easier to enjoy. Some viewers will even prefer this version simply because the realism makes the dramatic moments feel more intense and immediate, like the scenes are happening in a world you could step into. For me, though, the realism didn't automatically equal stronger emotion. It often did the opposite: it made everything look incredible, but feel flatter. So where do I land overall? I'd call it a slightly above-average film, which is not what you expect from The Lion King as a storyline. It's visually jaw-dropping, and it absolutely proves Disney can build a photoreal world at the highest level. But it doesn't consistently deliver the heart, expressiveness, or energy that made the original unforgettable. I think it's worth watching once, especially for the technical achievement, but I wouldn't call it essential, and I wouldn't rush to add it to a personal movie collection. The whole pitch behind this newer Lion King was clear: take the 1994 classic almost shot for shot and rebuild it as a photorealistic, nature documentary style animation, where animals move, react, and exist like real wildlife. And within that goal, the 2019 film is undeniably impressive on a technical level. The tiniest details, muscle shifts under fur, subtle facial tension, the weight of paws on dirt, are rendered with such precision that, at times, it genuinely feels like you're watching something straight out of an Animal Planet special. Visually, it's a near-flawless achievement. But once the initial awe settles, the bigger issues start to show, especially the film's brush with the uncanny valley. This concept usually describes the discomfort people feel when something looks almost real but not quite, creating emotional distance instead of connection. While it's often applied to human-like characters, it fits here too. These lions, hyenas, birds, and giraffes look extremely authentic. When they're simply behaving as animals, tracking prey, moving in herds, reacting to the environment, it works beautifully. The trouble is, this is still a story. They speak, deliver jokes, argue, and perform dramatic scenes, and those human-like moments don't always match the realism of their bodies and faces. The result can feel oddly hollow, like the film is stuck between two styles and can't fully commit to either. That's the first major misstep. It isn't truly naturalistic because it still needs theatrical performance, but it also refuses to stylize enough to make that performance expressive. In the original, animation allowed emotions to be exaggerated just enough to make Simba, Scar, and the supporting cast magnetic and memorable. Here, the insistence on realism flattens that personality. Simba, especially as he reaches his teen phase, becomes visually just another lion, with limited expression and muted charm. Timon and Pumbaa suffer too, their humor and energy feel restrained, as if the film is constantly worried about breaking its own realism rules. Jon Favreau, as he did in his earlier work, leans into spectacle first. The environment is so richly detailed that the camera often lingers on textures and tiny natural elements, fur, insects, blades of grass, dust in the air, in a way the 1994 film simply couldn't replicate. There's a deliberate, look at this, quality in the direction, like the movie wants to preserve your fascination frame by frame. It's mesmerizing in short bursts, but over time it can start to feel like the visuals are doing more of the storytelling than the characters are. To push the realism angle further, the film also reshapes certain plot beats. Some moments are expanded while others are trimmed down. Nala, for instance, is given more presence and a clearer sense of agency, appearing in scenes that emphasize her importance beyond being just a supporting character. On the flip side, a few iconic sequences are tightened or simplified, like parts of Scar's musical showcase, which feels less theatrical than before. The most noticeable shift, though, is in the musical set pieces. In aiming for photorealism, the movie trades away the dreamlike, exaggerated flair that musicals usually thrive on. That means you shouldn't expect the bold, playful visual storytelling from the original, no riot of color, no impossible animal formations, none of that animated magic that made those songs feel larger than life. Even Hakuna Matata, which used to be bursting with playful momentum, is presented more like a straightforward journey through changing landscapes than a fully imaginative musical sequence. Little by little, that choice drains the wonder out of the story, turning what was once vibrant and expressive into a calmer, more repetitive trek punctuated by occasional bursts of action. When you add all of these choices together, the hyperreal visuals, the limited expressiveness, the toned-down musical fantasy, the film becomes a technically astonishing production that's strangely lacking in warmth. It looks spectacular, but it rarely feels alive in the way the 1994 version did. In trying so hard to resemble reality, it loses some of the spirit that made the original hit so deeply. This new version keeps the outline of the classic story, but something important slips away in the process. The characters don't feel like themselves anymore. The film looks bigger, louder, and more modern, yet many of the personalities that made the original so memorable are toned down or completely reshaped. Let's start with Scar. In the animated film, he carried that delicious Disney villain flavor, sharp, theatrical, sarcastic, and cruel in a way that made him fun to hate. Here, that edge is mostly gone. Instead of a sly, ironic manipulator, we get a Scar who comes across more as defeated and bitter, less dramatic villain, more gloomy outcast nursing resentment about how the jungle's power structure turned against him. The result is a villain who feels flatter, and ironically less threatening. The hyenas also get the short end of the stick. In the original, they were distinct and weirdly iconic, each with a recognizable presence. In this film, they're reduced into a more straightforward pack dynamic. Shensi is clearly positioned as the leader, but the other two barely register as characters at all. One of them doesn't even feel like an individual, just part of the group. And Ed, the one hyena who used to bring that unhinged energy and signature laugh, simply isn't the same kind of character here. That chaotic weirdness is missing, and the trio's comedic identity is weaker because of it. But the biggest problem hits at the most important emotional peak, Mufasa's final scene. This moment should be the heart-stopping turning point, the one that leaves the audience wrecked. Instead, it feels rushed and strangely distant, too brief, too controlled, and not nearly as powerful as the 1994 version. Even after the death, the film doesn't really sit with grief long enough for it to land. The story keeps moving, and the weight doesn't have room to settle. The lack of expressive emotion in the faces, the muted visual impact, and the underwhelming use of sound and music in that section make the moment feel almost ordinary. It's a huge scene that somehow doesn't feel huge. What's interesting, though, is how often the movie seems to talk to the original animation. The film is constantly setting up shots and sequences that mirror the classic version, almost like it knows the audience is comparing them. And while those comparisons don't help the new film emotionally, because 2D animation carries a warmth and charm that hyperrealism struggles to recreate, the old memories still work in the remake's favor. Nostalgia fills in the gaps. Because honestly, how can you not grin when Hakuna Matata kicks in? Or feel your stomach tighten when Simba is caught in that chaotic stampede sequence? Those moments are already burned into pop culture. The movie leans into that advantage, almost like it's borrowing emotional credit from the original. The audience reacts partly because they remember how those scenes used to feel. And that's why it's surprising that, even with nearly half an hour of extra runtime, the film barely changes the story. The biggest additions aren't dramatic rewrites, they're minor shifts, the inclusion of a more defined hyena leader, the appearance of Rafiki's staff, and longer stretches of visual movement that extend scenes without adding much narrative punch. The camera often hunts for framing that resembles the animated film, as if carefully guiding fans back to familiar images. The one genuinely unexpected moment is a clever joke involving "Be Our Guest," a playful nod that stands out because it feels like the film briefly lets its guard down. Visually, though, it's hard to deny the craftsmanship. The environments are stunning, the textures and animal detail are impressive, and the realism is often jaw-dropping. Favreau pulls off a natural world mimicry that feels almost like a high-end nature documentary fused with a blockbuster. But the beauty comes with a downside. It's like staring at a technically perfect painting that doesn't carry much of the painter's personality. The spectacle is real, but spectacle alone can't carry the heart of the story. Among Disney's remakes, this might be the one most dependent on nostalgia to make the drama work. This newer version leans more intense and realistic in tone, which is why it makes sense that it carries a PG rating instead of a softer family label. Some scenes are likely to feel heavier for very young viewers. And that's the key, this isn't designed to replace the original for people who grew up with it. It's positioned as an updated presentation of the same coming-of-age story for a new generation. If you're over 30, the plot beats and character arcs will feel familiar. For kids seeing it now, the same story may feel fresh, dramatic, and visually impressive in a way the older animation doesn't hit for them. Older fans may still prefer the classic, but younger viewers will probably be pulled in by this modern look, and will likely be seeing a lot more of these live-action remakes in the coming years. As for my personal take, it's not bad. The story moves at a decent pace and still carries the core themes: family betrayal, growth, responsibility, and figuring out where you belong. There were some loud headlines floating around online about the movie's messaging, but the film itself felt pretty tame to me. If anything, some people who are very sensitive about nature themes might complain about how it reflects the food chain and natural order, but that's been baked into the concept from the start. Honestly, my grandfather, who worked as a game warden, would probably view it as a simple, kid-friendly gateway into talking about how nature works, especially the overuse idea and how balance gets disrupted. The young lion grows up, gets lost from home, then returns to reclaim his place arc is still solid. I do miss the old-school cartoon style, but I can't deny the CGI creates a big, glossy Disney spectacle. The visuals are often stunning, and when the movie focuses on the father and son emotional core, it still hits that Disney magic. And by the time it reaches the final clash, classic good versus evil, it becomes the kind of exciting, easy-to-follow action that most kids will absolutely enjoy. Now, I'll admit something, it's hard to talk about this version without thinking of other reviewers who have already taken it apart in detail. Some people have broken down what doesn't work, especially early on, in a way that's pretty thorough. So I'm going to try not to just repeat those critiques. If anything, I want to challenge myself to find a few positives, even if I still agree the remake isn't the strongest idea creatively. One thing I'll give it is that it tries to spell out a few themes more directly, especially the circle of life concept and the way it's contrasted against selfishness, misuse, and control. Some viewers felt